In our last lecture, we finished our series on Zwingli and the beginning of the Swiss Reformation. This time, we start a series on John Calvin and the continuation of the Swiss Reformation. Towering over the centuries of church history, there stands one figure of such monumental importance that he still commands attention and rouses intrigue, even 500 years after his appearance on the world stage. Called one of the truly great men of all time, he was a driving force so significant that his influence shaped the church and Western culture beyond that of any other theologian or pastor. His masterful expositions of Scripture laid down the doctrinal distinctives of the Protestant Reformation, making him arguably the leading architect of the Protestant cause. His theological thunder defined and articulated the core truths of that history-altering movement in the 16th century Europe. In turn, those lofty ideas helped fashion the founding principles of Western civilization, giving a rise to the republican form of government, the ideas of public education, and the philosophy of free market capitalism. A world-class theologian, a revered exegete, a renowned teacher, an ecclesiastical statesman, an influential reformer, he was all of these and more. His name was John Calvin. First and foremost, however, Calvin was a pastor, the faithful shepherd for 25 years to a local flock in Geneva, Switzerland. That was the opening paragraph to Dr. Stephen J. Lawson's book titled The Expository Genius of John Calvin. I couldn't think of a better way to begin our series on John Calvin than with what Dr. Lawson wrote. Being that we are Reformed Baptists, we're all familiar with John Calvin to some degree. After all, we believe in a theological system referred to as Calvinism. The extent to which most people know of John Calvin is the myth that he was responsible for the death of Servetus, and that he taught the doctrines of divine election and limited atonement, which in our era is mistakenly considered heretical and widely misunderstood. In this series, I will attempt to clear up misunderstandings and provide interesting information. I will take the time to teach the doctrines of grace, with an overview, and I hope well enough to clear up confusion, bring clarity, and I'll explain why 2 Peter 3:9 does not contradict divine election and does not support universal atonement or man's free will in salvation. I'll also provide you with historical facts which dispute the ignorant claim that Calvinism is not missional. First, let's begin with some biographical information about John Calvin. John Calvin is known for being part of the Swiss Reformation and a leader in Geneva, but he was actually French. He was born in the city of Nyon, in the Picardy region of northeastern France, which stretches from Paris through the vineyards of Champagne to the Bay of Somme in the English Channel. Nyon is northeast of Paris near the Notre Dame Cathedral. John Calvin was born on July 10, 1509. He was only 8 years old when Luther posted the 95 Theses in Wittenberg. His given name in French is Jean Calvin. His family was what we'd consider in the socioeconomic middle class. Theodore Beza wrote that Calvin's parents were widely respected and in comfortable circumstances. His father was a financial administrator for the bishop of the local diocese. His father used this position to arrange for John Calvin to become a chaplain after graduation from university. Calvin's mother died while he was only 6 years old, and she was never mentioned in Calvin's writings. Joel Beeke wrote that there is an argument among historians that Calvin did not mention his mother because, as he wrote, she was steeped in the medieval Roman Catholic devotion to relics. In his biting treatise on relics, he recalls kissing a reputed fragment of the hand of Anna, the mother of Mary, at the church of Arskamp, not far from Nyon, where his mother may have taken him. Calvin had an older brother, 2 younger brothers, one named Francois, who died as a young child, and he also had 2 half-sisters after his father remarried. John Calvin's older brother Charles was also led to the priesthood by their father and quit the priesthood in 1536. In 1523, at the age of 14, Calvin attended the Collège de la Marche in Paris for 3 months, which served as preparation for the subsequent education. He then attended the Collège de Montaigu, I probably butchered that, for an education which began with the Master's of Arts degree, followed by theological studies, and then ordination into the priesthood. Stephen J. Lawson wrote that Calvin's time at the university resulted in a Master of Arts degree at age 17, but more important, this future reformer emerged with a solid grounding in the basics of a classical education, including Latin, logic, and philosophy. Joel Beeke wrote, "The College of de Montaigu was well known for both its theological conservatism and severe discipline. Overall, the college was marked by a narrow-minded, hair-splitting orthodoxy that resulted in violent opposition to and persecution of nascent French Protestantism. One of the alumni of the college was Erasmus, who described the college as filthy, bleak, inhospitable, reeking with the foulest of smells, and clotted with dirt." It sounds much like a five-star resort, doesn't it? Calvin graduated with his master's degree in 1528. At this point, John's father attempted to use his position to garner yet 2 more positions in the church for John. However, his attempts were unsuccessful, and furthermore, he had instructed John to become a lawyer instead of continuing into his formal theological training and then into the priesthood. According to Beza, Calvin said this about his father's instructions: "When he saw that the science of law made those who cultivate it wealthy, he was led to change his mind by the hope of material gain for me. So it happened that I was called back from the study of philosophy to learn law." In 1528, John's dad was excommunicated after being accused of fraud and refusing to give the bishop the financial record books. For 2 years, John Calvin attended law school at the University of Orleans, which Beeke wrote was the preeminent French law school at the time. Then Calvin attended the University of Bourges in central France for 2 years, where he became a serious humanist and learned Greek and logic. Stephen J. Lawson wrote, "Armed with such abilities, Calvin would later be nicknamed the accusative case for his penchant to argue his point convincingly." Other than this, little else is known about the young Calvin. We don't even know which year Calvin became a Protestant. We only know that it was somewhere between 1530 and 1532. In the year 1531, after his father died, Calvin took the opportunity to resume his education in his area of preference, which was literature. Calvin moved back to Paris and enrolled at Collège de France in Paris. After his time at the college in Paris, Calvin went back to Bourges to earn a doctorate. He also wrote his first book while he was earning his PhD, and it was actually his doctoral dissertation, a commentary on a work by ancient Roman philosopher Seneca, which translated into English was titled Concerning Mercy. The commentary was published in 1532. This commentary revealed young Calvin was fluent in Greek and also revealed his ability to understand authorial intent. One of Calvin's professors, John Major, was a scholastic, and he rejected papal authority. But he was also greatly critical of Luther and Zwingli, especially in regards to their adherence to sacramentalism. Scholars postulate the influence of Major on Calvin, suggesting his teaching may be at least partially why Calvin would be against scholasticism when he became Reformed, and condemned scholasticism for being contrary to Augustinianism. Calvin also later recognized the educational changes in light of God's will, and as part of his being brought to faith and sound theology, which we find in the following quote, as translated from French by Joel Beeke. "God, by the secret leading of his providence, turned my course another way than the study of law. First, when I was too firmly addicted to the superstitions of the papacy to be drawn easily out of such a deep mire, by a sudden conversion God subdued and made my mind teachable, which was already more rigid than suited my age. Having therefore received a taste and knowledge of true piety, I burned with such a desire to carry my study further that, although I did not drop other subjects, I had no zeal for them. In less than a year, All who were looking for a purer doctrine began to come and learn from me, although I was just a novice and a beginner. In November of 1533, Calvin wrote a sermon for a friend of his named Nicholas Cop, who was the rector of the University of Paris. The message was delivered by Cop at the beginning of the university's winter term. Philip Schaff wrote that the message was a plea for a reformation on the basis of the New Testament and a bold attack on the scholastic theologians of the day. Cope encountered strong resistance for his expressed Lutheran-like views. Calvin, in turn, much like a spy novel as Stephen Lawson wrote, fled Paris in the middle of the night by lowering himself out of a window by means of sheets and escaping to safety in the guise of a vine dresser with a gardening hoe on his shoulder. Lawson later added, after suffering imprisonment for a short time, Calvin fled to the estate of Louis de Tillet, a well-to-do man who was sympathetic to the Reformation. In this quiet nest, as described by Calvin, he had the opportunity to spend 5 months in de Tillet's extensive theological library. There he read the Bible, along with the writings of the Church Fathers, most notably Augustine. By hard work, along with genius and God's grace, Calvin was becoming a self-taught theologian of no small stature. Finally, under the deepening conviction of the truth of Scripture, Calvin renounced the income he had been drawing from the Catholic Church since childhood for his supposed Nyon pastorate. The die was cast. He was fully aligned with the truths and the cause of the Reformation. After a brief journey to Paris and Orleans, Calvin went to Basel, Switzerland. During his time at Tillet's in 1534, John Calvin began to write a book which wouldn't be completed until the following year and was not published until 1542. A book titled Psychopanchia, which was addressing an Anabaptist error of soul sleep. During this time, Calvin also visited with French reformer, but not a Protestant, Jacques Lefebvre, who was a humanist of great intellect, an Aristotelian and mystic, who was a scholar on par with Erasmus, and worked to purify worship by doing away with the cult of the saints, and as Beeke wrote, the other aspects of what he regarded as corrupt worship present in medieval Roman Catholicism. Calvin fled France in early November of 1534 because Protestants were being arrested and burned for being heretics. He then arrived in Basel, Switzerland sometime in January of 1535, where he met Farel and Verret. Both would soon go on to Geneva. He would later write about his friendship with these two men, calling their friendship a holy bond of friendship, and he also wrote, I think there has never been in ordinary life a circle of friends so heartily bound to each other as we have been in our ministry. With both of you, I discharge here, that is, Geneva, the office of pastor, and so far from there being any appearance of rivalry, I always seemed to be of one mind with you. Calvin resided in Basel until the following year, 1536, and it was during this time where he began to write his masterpiece, The Institutes of the Christian Religion. He then continued to occasionally work on the Institutes over the course of the following 3 decades, and then he presented the final published edition which we possess. The first edition was published in 1536. James White said that Calvin was such an eloquent author that the Institutes read as if they were written in our lifetime. Calvin taught the core doctrines of Christianity and Reformed theology with precision, arguably matched by few others. R.C. Sproul wrote that Calvin's commentaries on nearly the entire Bible remain a model of sound exegesis and practical theological application, benefiting the church even today. His Institutes of the Christian Religion is perhaps the finest systematic theology ever produced. In 1536, a short-term treaty was reached which granted amnesty for French exiles. Calvin went home to collect his brother and sister and take them to Strasbourg, where he could sit under Martin Bucer for a while, after which he had intended to relocate again, where he would live a secluded life focused on studying and writing. However, on their way from France to Strasbourg, there was a violent war between the Holy Roman Empire, led by King Charles V, and France, led by King Francis I. There was not a route to Germany, so they had to take a detour to Switzerland. Calvin and his siblings settled in the Swiss Alps at the beautiful lakeside town of Geneva due to the imploring of William Farel, who had become the reformed leader of the recently reformed Geneva, who Farel more or less threatened Calvin to stay with him. I'll let Calvin's personal account explain the situation. Farel, who burned with an extraordinary zeal to advance the gospel, immediately strained every nerve to detain me. And after having learned that my heart was set upon devoting myself to private studies, for which I wished to keep myself free from other pursuits, and finding that he gained nothing by entreaties, he proceeded to utter an imprecation that God would curse my retirement and the tranquility of the studies which I sought, if I should withdraw and refuse to give assistance when the necessity was so urgent. By this imprecation I was so stricken with terror that I desisted from the journey which I had undertaken. Lake Geneva may not be the largest lake in Europe, but under Calvin and his company of pastors, the city of Geneva served as the new epicenter of the Reformation, and quickly became what many referred to as the New Jerusalem, which I'll explain in future lessons. With the exception of a period of about 3.5 years, Calvin was a permanent resident of Geneva, though he did not become an official citizen of Geneva until sometime during the final decade of his life. Calvin was known as a friendly, kind, and tender-hearted man, and he was also known as being truly pastoral as anyone could be. Yet, Calvin was also a shy man who loved to study and write. In spite of these beautiful attributes, the partnership in Geneva didn't last long, and we will pick up from here next time.